I remember he did a punch up someplace, and they were like, everybody sounded like Dennis Miller. There's these 8-year-old kids running around, hey, cha-cha, and yeah.
Let's everybody for Anthony Eugenio. We're having next time. Very funny. Wayne Russell, everybody.
Welcome to the Open Mic Pain with Anthony and Wayne podcast.
Bonjour and bienvenue at Open Mic Pain with Anthony and Wayne. I'm here with a brand new, fantastic guest. This guy's an Emmy Award winner, so way far above where we should be ever talking to, but he came to talk to us. He's a writer, comedian, and producer, many more. He's been a writer for the Drew Carey Show, Dennis Miller Live, Sabrina Teenage Witch. Wayne sent me a list, and I was like, I can't remember all of that, Wayne, and I wrote it on the back of a piece of cardboard so I can get as much as I fucking can, because this is as good as it gets, guys. I can't remember it,
and that comes in handy.
Goddamn right. I'm here at Ed Driscoll. How you doing, brother?
I am good, thank you. You're starting to describe this. I'm like, oh, this guest sounds interesting. Who's coming on? I'm like, oh.
Well, it's normally only because I have a human bin of waste that I normally go with, and that's Wayne Russell. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm really excited. I'm not going to geek out too much, but I will say the list of things that you've worked on defined a lot of my growing up years. The Drew Carey Show, and
so thanks for calling me old in a polite way. Yeah.
You're welcome. But
anyway, it was a pleasure, guys. Take care. I look forward to watching it air.
But it's incredible. I've been thinking about it since we set this up. That all of my, a lot of my favorite shows throughout my life, you've been behind them, and here we are, somewhat face to face talking. So I really do appreciate the time.
Oh, I'm glad to entertain you as a youngster.
Yeah. So I guess we'll jump right into it. I'm really curious about how you started out doing what you do. Did you start out in stand up, and how, or what was your main goal when you decided I'm going to do this?
Well, and it's funny, and now too, as we sit there and go, like, okay, because I started in the 30s apparently, but no, I started. But as a kid, I loved I'm 62, so I grew up in the 70s, and I loved Robert Klein, and I always loved comics. I loved being funny, and realized I had a little knack for making people laugh, but I don't know, I didn't, my friends always made me laugh and stuff, so I didn't so much consider myself a funny person, but it seemed to kind of go that way. And then when I noticed like teachers and some adults kind of laughing at some of the stuff I said, I thought like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I have something here with this. But I loved comics and all stuff like that. And, and I hosted the talent show and did stuff in high school. So I knew I kind of liked doing it, but I kind of thought, well, I always liked writing too, and I thought I'll probably become a writer of some sort, a newspaper writer or something, and do some stand-up on the side maybe or whatever. And I went to school at Ohio State in the 80s, and that was right when stand-up comedy started getting all these clubs and stuff, right? But I got onto campus, and the first day I got on campus, it was just weird. There was this thing advertising amateur comedy competition. It was like so weird, and in my head I kind of was like, that seems like an odd sign. And it's like you go over to the student union and you do 10 minutes of and stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going to go do this. And so I went over there, and what's funny was everybody there was doing George Carlin, Robert Klein, Richard Pryor. Like, I was the only person who had my own stuff. Now, if those guys had been there doing that stuff, I would have been screwed, right? Mm-hmm. These people doing it were not George Carlin, and so it wasn't effective. I was the only goofball talking about from my point of view. So I did really well somehow, even though all that other material was much more, polished and funny. But because I was me, so that was an interesting lesson to kind of pick up on, right? Mm-hmm. So I won this little competition, then I started going to some open mics at a comedy club there in Columbus while I was in school. And did good. I just always did pretty good. And, in retrospect, some of it was the audience was just so relieved to see somebody who just wasn't awful, probably. But there were some other decent folks there. But, I remember when the very first time I went on a stage in Columbus at that, and it was this packed crowd, and that's amateur night is what they called it then. So it's a pretty forgiving crowd. They're rooting for you. You know what I mean? They paid $2. They want to hear, and so compared to everybody else, like I ended up like blowing the room away. And then your prize was to get to come back and open for the professionals for the rest of the week, like Wednesday through Saturday. So I was pretty excited, and I was like, man, I did really good. And thinking, I'm like 20 years old or something. And I'm thinking like, I'm going to be on TV like tomorrow. I'm really good, So Wednesday night, okay, now it's the full paying patrons, right? They're paying $25 a pop. They're not necessarily rooting for you. It's more like, okay, let's see the humor. Let's see it, fun man, right? And there was not a packed room of them. They were sitting out, spread out, probably like 30 people. So I go up there Wednesday night and just eat it. I mean, it's just, it's getting nothing. And of course, I'm pretty rattled at this point. It's like my 6th time on stage ever or something. And I'm in front of these people. I'm just complete silence. And of course, it had to be one of those rooms where no backstage. So to exit, you had to like walk through the crowd humiliatingly. So I tank it for 15 and I'm sweating, I'm walking off. And I actually hear this guy say to this date, what the hell was that? As I'm walking by. So it was fantastic. So I go from, I'm the greatest comic that's ever lived to, oh my God, I should take my own life. Like, just like that. So it's like, okay, what's the happy medium? And so I'm walking around campus next day, and I was like, okay, Ed, the truth probably lies in between. And I kind of had to go through those two things right away to say, okay, this is a process and what it is. And then, from there, saying I'm from Pittsburgh originally, and after college, I went back to Pittsburgh and I started working at a local club there. And they liked me, and was Funny Bone in Pittsburgh, and they had just opened up. And so I was emceeing, which is a great way to learn too, because you work the easy crowds and the tough crowds and the drunk crowds and the good crowds, tremendous like training sessions there. And Dennis Miller was the established like guy in town in Pittsburgh at that time, and he did local TV and so forth. And he was one of the first people to approach me. He's like, you got a bright future, kid. He said to me. And, I wasn't good, but he saw something in there. And I thought, I don't think this is a guy that idly throws out compliments, So I was like pretty thrilled because I thought like, this guy's like fantastic. And so he went on to New York and Saturday Night Live. And then my career in Pittsburgh I kind of started doing some of the stuff Dennis did, local television, doing the stuff there. And then I moved to Boston, which you may have heard of, and was up there working in the early 90s. And I hadn't seen Dennis in several years, probably like 5 years, 6 years. And he heard I'd been in Boston, and he was coming into Boston to do some concerts. And he called around there and found out, it was asking, hey, I hear Ed Driscoll's living there. I'd like him to open for me. So that was cool, like to get a call from the club that normally would just treat me like crappy, like they treat everybody else in the biz. And they're like, hey, Dennis is asking for you to come. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. And, that was the fortuitous kind of time frame because now I had actually gotten half decent. I had fulfilled some of my potential, and it was fun working in front of him. And his audiences, again, I'm not saying you have to be a professor to like my stuff, but I like to shoot as high bar as I can, and he certainly does. So those audiences are good for me, because they're like real listeners and they like intelligent stuff. So I was always a good match in front of him. And right at that time, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I had a little frog in my throat.
He's coughing. I said, wow. But let me interrupt real quick, just as a quick aside. Boston in the early 90s, you must have come up with some absolute murderers for it to be in that time as well, right? That must have been insane.
I guess it's just funny, but we all, going back to that, because I was
so
in
like Louis and Bill Burr and all those guys, Dennis Leary.
Bill and I's paths have never crossed. It's weird. I don't know why that is. I know everyone he knows. And it's just so weird. And I didn't even know he was from Boston. I'm telling you, like 2 years ago, somebody like, oh, he's from Boston. I'm like, he is? So somehow I missed him. He must, I don't know if he was just behind me or whatever. And I was there till...
It could have been. Like Dennis Leary, I think, was right before. Like it was like Dennis Leary, then...
ahead of me, some of those guys, like we were talking like Stephen Wright, Dennis Leary, Lenny Clark
Yep.
and those guys, Mike Donovan,
Yeah.
Mike McDonald, who was the guy who kind of sponsored me into
The
Boston.
Ding Ho crew.
Yeah, that whole crew. And then it was me. I worked with because I was part of Cross Comedy, an improv troupe. There was David Cross and Jonathan Groff,
Okay.
and John Benjamin and all those
Yeah.
guys. So that was kind of our little milieu. And
Well,
those
that's
were-
a hell
those
of a
were
group in
events.
themselves.
Yeah, it was funny, and I wrote about it in my book. I wrote a lot about Boston in my first book I'll plug, Spilled Gravy. But
folks.
about that whole experience of cross comedy, and boy, we had some great, obviously there was a ton of talent there, and we had some really funny stuff. But boy, when we tanked it. You just never could tell what we were going to do, and it seemed like every time, like they loved us locally. We worked out a Catch a Rising Star there, and so locally, like, whoa, they love this. But anytime someone came to see us that was important, like from LA or New York or something, some crap would go down. Every time like the air conditioning ran out or something. It's like it would always be some debacle. And then after we all kind of split up and we're working in Hollywood, and all of a sudden we all got successful. And we were like, somehow we had to split up, guys, to do okay in this biz. I don't know why. It was just one of those weird things. But those were super fun times. Jonathan Groff, there's a producer. Like everybody in that troupe had a really nice career and out there now. And so that.
Now, does David Cross, he was from Boston? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
You didn't, yes,
And
indeed.
John Benjamin. That guy's an animal.
And John Benjamin, too. Yeah.
How was did John Benjamin do stand-up? Because I've obviously only seen his acting now.
No, not so much. He kind of, was acting. He was in that, I was one of the few people that was just a stand-up. I'd never acted when I got into cross comedy, but I started writing the sketches. And then I thought, and then I started putting myself in some sketches, even though I'm not, I would never stretch. We had real actors, John Ennis, guys like that, who are good actors. But I would put myself into some small role. Like, I'm not going to be a sheriff in the 18th, century or some weird, like, challenging role. But it's like, a snarky me I can do. But it's funny, I'd never acted. And then I'll never forget, like, the first time I wrote myself into a sketch, and I'm not thinking about it because I'm just writing the script. And then I'm realizing, I have to actually memorize those lines and go out there and interact. I remember those lights going down that first time. I was like, well, that was stupid. Next time I'm just writing for everybody else. But I relaxed and it was good. And as I've told others, like it really helped my stand-up too, and learning to act. And a friend of mine who's the best comedy editor, John Binninger in LA, but he's funny. Editing is all he's wanted to do. But he took acting classes and writing classes and stand-up and everything, and just to be a better all of those things. And so whenever I've been able to stretch myself a little, do a little acting, do a little this, that, boy, it does. It helps your mindset, helps me write better for actors or whatever. So the more of that stuff you can dip your toe in, I found is good. Hey, and did you know in the early 90s, I actually taught a class at the Boston Center for Adult Education for 8 weeks, I think, on doing stand-up. My great friend, very funny, Bill Broadus, who is now a script teacher there at either at BU or BC, I think at BU, and the John Katz, another kind of Boston guy. It was John from New York originally, whatever, but he's been a Boston guy for a long time. But I took over that class for Bill, and that was fun. It was trying to teach how to be funny. Sometimes it's like trying to teach somebody how to be good looking. You do the best you can, right? You want to look as good as you can or whatever, but if you don't have that little comedy chromosome, probably not going to go to beyond that. But what I stressed when I was teaching that class to people was like, hey, this will help your public speaking. This will help. There's so many things. Like very few of you are going to be a stand-up comic. I was saying to them, but I said, this will open up other avenues and stuff. And it was really fun because I really had a little of everything, and people that, we worked on our sets for like 6 weeks, and then the graduation was them doing their shows, in front of their friends and family. And it was really fun. Some people, you had a couple in there, it was like, oh, they really got some wit. And some other folks that were just okay, but enjoyed it. And then, one or two psychos who think they're funny and aren't. And those are the most, obviously, because you're like, look, I don't want to get you down, but holy crap, this is hard when you know how to do it. So it's, but.
Oh, man, that's super interesting.
I'm sorry.
We
All
said-
I'm doing is talking. You guys should talk. It's your show. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Keep going. This is better for editing. Wayne says all the time, as long as the guest talks as long as possible is the easiest way to edit it. So we wanted one really, like we were talking about for a couple weeks before you came on, why we were so excited to have you, is because I feel like at the stage that we're at, all of us are kind of like little babies doing our comedy, where we're just like, we don't know why we're doing it even. We're just kind of following a light that we have to follow, and we're doing it that way. And you never really think about, like, what are the avenues that comedy can take you down? And comedy writing is something I think stand-ups have such a obviously really good like leg up in the game to look into. I think it's a great, especially now where you could be a little bit more remote with your writing. Yeah. I think there's something that is underutilized for our community. So, again, that's why we wanted to have you on. So what was your first comedy writing gig where you were like, I was doing stand-up in there?
And like you say, the good news is there's no set route, and the bad news is there's no set route. And I didn't really know, I knew I liked to write, even in high school. I wrote my own lame little stuff, but it was my lame stuff, so it did well because I was speaking, from the heart. And it's just a mixture of things. So just dipping my toe into different things. Like you said, I didn't have plans per se. When early 90s in Boston, all of a sudden a lot of the club work started drying up. And I had gotten used to some of the good, perks like eating. And I was like, okay, I'm not making enough money now. How can I use my sense of humor? I'll never forget. I saw an ad in a paper. They used to have this thing called newspaper. You'd like hold it in your hands and stuff. And it literally was that advertising. It was a little local greeting card company, like in Melrose or something. And they were just saying, looking for, quippy things for to write greeting cards, and I thought, well, I can do that, right? Some little lines or whatever. So I sat there with my word processor, which I was so cool because nobody else had a word processor, man. That was up there at that time. And I wrote out these things and I mailed them to this thing, and I thought, like, oh, this will be good. I'll pick up a little side money. And then like 3 weeks later, I get back a letter from them saying, sorry, not funny or original enough. I remember I was like, oh my God, I just felt like I've been told I wasn't fit to clean the grill at Burger King or something. It was so deflating. I was like, oh, okay. But then that's when right about that time is when Dennis came in, and then Dennis was getting this show on HBO too, which I didn't know they had just been talking to him about. And then so he liked what I'd done, and he was like, hey, do you write topical? That was funny. Do you write topical? And the answer, honestly, was I didn't, because topical stuff is gone like that, right? And as a comic, and especially touring around, you want stuff that's evergreen that you can do for a while. Like topical, by the time you get it where you want it, I mean, if you're doing a nightly show, but if you're doing stand-up, so I didn't. But of course, knowing my first good showbiz lesson, I lied in his face. I'm like, oh yeah, I write all the time. He's like, yeah, good. But here's what's funny. Even with Dennis recommending me, I had to sit down and write 100 topical jokes and send them into HBO for them to approve. And, I didn't really even write topical. So I got USA Today and I sat down and again, it's like, this is one of those things. Can I do that? I don't know. Let's find out. So I did it, they liked it. Luckily, he liked it. And that's when I ended up moving out there. And it was kind of funny because 8 months after I was rejected by the greeting card company, I won an Emmy, And so it's like, I tell people that, same guy and probably same ability, so hang in there, you know what I mean? And since all my years, that's how the showbiz thing goes, no matter how accomplished. But that's when I like to tell people, hang in there, because I was feeling pretty low, and it's like, no, that's the same dude. I bet those were pretty good card things. The person reading them just didn't like them. That's okay,
That's a pretty good correlation to stand-up in itself, where you can go in one room and do the same set and bomb completely, then the next night everybody loves you.
Yeah, you can have and to really have to discern. Sometimes it is the crowd. I just tell people not to blame the crowd, but you know what? Sometimes it is. Mm-hmm. It really is. But people that blame the crowd every time is like, well, no, you're just not funny, But the more you do it, as I'm sure you guys know, the more you do it, the more you get an idea going like, I think it was this crappy crowd, or it's like, well, I kicked that one like Pele, so no wonder they didn't laugh. So I was like recording the sets and listening, going like, oh, you know what, that one was my fault, and this one going like, not really. And you go up there and it's a bunch of drunks or whatever, and babysitting drunks is not my favorite thing, even when I was one, and I don't care for, but if you can realistically look at it and go, yeah, sometimes it is the crowd's fault. I remember Gary Shandling early on because he was the first guy that came in that week in Columbus that I worked with, and he had just done like one Tonight Show. So, but he was kind of like, oh my God, it's that guy. But he was so funny. He told me, he goes, Eddie, I used to bomb. I still bomb, and I think I'm good, and I still bomb. And he was saying that. I was like, okay, it's good to know. But I guess, I've been pretty lucky. If I bombed as much as some folks do, I couldn't do it, It's punishing. And so I guess and then these, your batting average now, or for me, is like, I have a pretty good guess of how stuff's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it's experience, right? It's just experience.
Oh yeah, we're 1 year in now, so that's
I was just going to ask you guys how long So, well, how often you hop up there and do it and stuff too?
So we've been anywhere, I would say, between 2 and 4 times a week is what we've been trying to hit up. Like this week, we went up 3 times. We did a show yesterday in a dive bar, which is definitely our domain. And then if we get. Yeah, if we do like 3 to 4 shows where people are like meant to go to a month, that's what we're trying. Like right now, that'd be our goal. It'd be like, that'd be awesome. Like get a show a week or something like that. And outside of that, we're doing open mics in between. So the open mics are tough because 9 out of 10 of them, you're just doing it in front of your friends who are also open mic comedians, and you're just trying to like, can I make them laugh? Then I at least know there's something there. And outside of that, it's all science.
To assess, I hear you. You guys know more about open mics than I do right now because it's been a long time. Just since it's not something I would drop down into in a long time. Not that I'm so above it, but if you don't have to do it, it's not a bad idea to skip it. But I'm sure you guys have the same kind of like some that are quite good, and it sucks if you only have an audience of comics. Yeah, that I guess you're practicing up there, but getting laughs or not, you can't really.
No, that was a huge part in the beginning for us to figure out was, as you know, obviously you write your stuff on stage most of the time where you do it the first time and it's really not what it's going to eventually be. You need the feedback to do it. And in the beginning with us, you're not really getting any feedback because it's all comics. But what we found in the first year is the next step up for us was kind of finding there are a lot of mics that are open mics, but they're pre-booked. And you kind of got to know the guy to get on the show and stuff like that. And we're noticing those are getting us in front of real people. And that, to us, is the only game right now. Like, we'll give the money back that we're going to get paid if we can get in front of a real group of people. Because
no, you're right. That's how you're going to grow.
That's the only way.
Comics, our comics. And, we don't laugh, right? We go like, oh, that's funny. That's like even when you're in a writing room, some of the funniest people in the world. It is like, instead of laughing out loud, we're like, oh, that's funny. That's funny. Get that down. And it's hard to explain that to civilians, to like people come up and they'll tell you a joke and I'll go, oh, that's funny. Go, yeah, I can tell you're really laughing. I'm just like, I don't really laugh. I only laugh at really stupid stuff that my friends said to me. Or, otherwise I sit there and go, oh, that's funny. That's the comedian's way. But I think you guys are smart in that regard. And I'm sorry, you started to ask me about all the differential of writing, but it was the same thing for me. So I went out there, wrote for Dennis, and then the agencies are out there. Oh, you're pretty funny. And then Jeff Cesario, who was the EP on Dennis's show and was friends with Louis Anderson, he's like, hey, Louis doing a Tonight Show. He wants some tweaks. Will you help him? And that's where I first worked with Louis, and we just had a lifelong friendship till he sadly passed a few years ago. But one of my favorite people to work with. But I was like, I think I can do that, and I wrote in his voice, And what I did find was I was able to write in people's voices, like Dennis's and stuff like that. Like I could kind of, and then that just led to intros to people, and then Louis was like, oh, you got to check this guy out, and then Billy Crystal heard about me, and I was able to write in his voice, and it's all that stuff. But he's like, can I do this? I think so, but I knew I had an ability to write in other people's voices besides mine. And that's something you're talking about, like stand-up comics, but like even not every stand-up comic, if you can't write in other people's voices, you're probably not going to work on sitcoms and so forth. It's like I do a lot of punch-up things. You got to be able to go in there, and it's like, well, why is this funny? It's like, yeah, that's a great joke, but like, that actor would never say that, or in this context. And one of the funniest, there's nobody funnier than Dennis. But I remember he did a punch-up someplace, and they were like, everybody sounded like Dennis Miller. There's 8-year-old kids running around, hey, cha-cha, and and it doesn't work. So that was weird. And Dennis was like, I don't think they like my punch-up, and I was gently trying to explain. I'm like, well, it's funny, but 8-year-olds don't do Watergate references and stuff.
That was one of my questions that we wrote down, actually, was like, when you write for somebody, are you trying to write in their voice, or are you just writing jokes and hoping they can interpret it in their voice? But that's the skill, right?
Well, yeah, it is. And then sometimes it's like when I wrote, I've had a strange career. I wrote a patter for Barry Manilow. It's like, I don't know what he sounds like. So I'd be writing his jokes, but you start to pick it up in your ear and see what he's comfortable with and going, okay, I kind of get this, or try this, try that.
Barry Manilow patter? Man, it must have been a lot of banging fucking young girls. That guy was an animal.
What's that?
Barry Manilow? That guy was an animal. Love him.
Oh.
Yeah, what pattern did you write for him? I want to
He
hear
was
this.
banging young girls, he said?
Yeah, hell yeah. Barry Manilow?
But I don't think he means underage. I think he just
No,
means
not
younger than him.
No offense, but I don't think he means girls. Barry is openly gay, so.
Oh, was he?
Oh, yeah.
You're thinking Barry White?
Okay. Well, yeah.
I was thinking Barry White.
I didn't know about.
I was like, God, a pattern for Barry White. Sorry, I had Barry White in my head. I was like, that must have been intense.
Yeah. That's
No, Manilow must have been intense too, actually, now that you say that.
Nicest guy, super nice guy. You know what I loved about him too is like, if I pitch a joke and he'd just say like, oh, Eddie, that's really funny, but I don't think I can say that. I was like, oh, that's the nicest way to turn down a joke in the world. And it's like, and if you're not comfortable, don't do it. It's like, I wish if everybody was that polite turning down a joke, I could maybe only go to see my shrink once a week instead of 5 times or whatever. So
that must be the toughest part of writing, is when you write for stand-up, obviously you try everything and you're like, well, that's funny to me, I'm going to keep doing it. But when you write for other people, you got to take a lot of rejection in there.
yeah, and you never know. And then, like I say too, you get comfortable as you got, like God, because I wrote with Louis for stuff for years, and same with Billy Crystal and some of those guys. Like you start to know what they like and this and that, and you don't miss too much. But yeah, not everybody is able to jump around like that, because there's a couple of friends, and God bless them, that are really good stand-up comics, and they're always like, I can't get on a show. And I sit there and I'm thinking, like, because that's great, you're writing these jokes, but you got to be able to write situation comedy. This is funny because of when it's happening here, and this is what this character would do. This is so out of character. Great joke. This guy would never say it. It's not going to work. So like finding out that, I didn't know if I could write on sitcoms either. That after I was doing the stuff for Louis and doing some writing for all these variety shows, and then the agency's like, hey, can you write sitcoms? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, oh, so I had to write a spec sitcom. Now, this was after I was still very accomplished in these other fields, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And I was like, really? Like, it's like, I'm winning awards and stuff for this. And like, they're like, no, they got to see a sample of a show like a sitcom. And I found that, like, I was like, really? I have to continuously prove myself. But fair enough. And so I wrote a spec, and people liked it, and it got me into some shows. But I have to say, working in variety rooms and in sitcom rooms, sitcom has a little bit of this, like, oh, can you write sitcom? But there were more people kind of sliding along in sitcom than in variety for me. But in a sitcom room, you can coast a little bit because you're not doing all the actual writing all the time. Like in variety, you're pretty much turning in, here's all my shit today, and in a sitcom, it's kind of a group thing. You're tossing
kind of like a round table.
Yeah, but you're not sitting there going, let's see it. Here it is. What did you get? What did you get in the monologue like today and stuff? So I thought it was a little funny. Like some of the folks in sitcom were a little snobbier about it, and I thought, like, quite frankly, guys, I think this was harder having done this. But there's some brilliant, obviously, a lot of great sitcom and are great with story arc and that, and I had to kind of learn that as I did it too. It's like I said, like I just kept trying everything, and if I if I could do it, I could. And if I couldn't, I couldn't. But it was fortunate for me. I was able to kind of use my humor in all these different areas. So thank God, it made it good for me too, because, things are cyclical and it's like sitcoms are hot now. And it's like variety's down. It's like, oh, you have friends that are just sitcom writers or just this kind of writing. Like if that show goes away in favor, for a while, they're out of work or whatever. So I think it was out of more fear than anything else. I'm like, well, I'm trying everything because you got to spin a lot of plates out here. You never know what TV's going to do, or showbiz. Like David Spade, one of the great sayings, he says, the only thing a successful project in show business does is insure you another 6 months in show business. And it's so true. You're constantly going to have to redo stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring to now, since you're wearing the sex shirt. I'm sure you're still in the game and all that. What do you think makes sitcoms not as popular? Like they're at a cyclical nature now, as far as getting, like a multicam type of show of a sitcom.
Yeah.
You don't really see.
I don't know. I can't really put my finger on that. It's like people liked westerns, now they don't. It's just it comes and goes. I quantifying the public's taste of what they're gonna suddenly like is hard to do. So, boy, I sure don't know, and neither do a lot of network executives who are making millions and still don't know. It's like, hey, I don't know either. I'll do it for half that. Stick me in the executive position. I can put shit together,
Do you think the market is saturated, too saturated with streaming? Netflix has 1,000 different shows coming out.
There's an argument for that, for sure. I think, it's interesting. I remember reading a thing, well, like all of it, right? Even like stand-up, because everybody's on. There's so much more stuff you have to sift through. And, you hope that the cream can kind of rise and this and that. But I remember reading a really interesting article, and I wish I could think of who wrote it, because that's crappy. I always like to give the writers a credit. But this person was positing that could somebody like Bob Dylan or Woody Allen get discovered today? Because having to go on YouTube and cut through all this stuff that's out there. And it's it's a real interesting question. I don't know the answer to that, But I think there's a saturation of everything. And everybody's got the right to do what they want to do, but it's, you see plenty of just crap, and it's like, you think well, mine would have a better chance if they didn't have to sift through 20 things that were terrible and then stop watching, kind of thing. So, it's not the best thing, but who am I to tell people to you're not good. Can you not do that?
Right.
It's not at all.
That was the first thing we had to learn not to do, was to realize that. Because when you start out and you see someone, you're like, wow, that person should never, ever do stand-up ever again. That hurts me that they even tried. And then you see them 6 months later, and they're great. And you're like, wow, there is really...
You never know. And sometimes it's not great, but they happen to strike a nerve. And I will not say any names, but sorry. But no, there's a couple folks. I remember thinking in my head, like, oh, my God, what are they moving to L.A. for? There's nothing happening. Boom! I get on a show or whatever, and you're just like, you know what? I have no right to judge anything. It's like you can never tell. You can't tell. And so, it's not my right to discourage anybody, and I wouldn't want to. God, it's all discouraging enough on its own. They sure don't need help.
I remember flipping through TV years ago and coming across Louis C.K. on HBO. And watching 3 minutes, and it was just a joke that just didn't hit me in the moment. I was like, this guy sucks. And I changed the channel. Then years later, I think it was Anthony, was like, hey, did you listen to whatever is Hilarious or whatever album was? I was like, no. And I'm listening to it. I'm like, I know this guy. Why do I know this guy? And that memory popped in my head. I'm like, why? Man, I wish I could have had 5 more years of enjoying that comedy.
Yeah, who knows? Although, maybe his earlier stuff when you saw it wasn't that good, right? We all have our ups and downs. It's funny, and it's just very sad for Louis and all that that went on there. But I knew Louis in Boston, and he was high school. So he told this story, and I did not remember it, but he told this story on Conan, that apparently I brought him up for the first time ever on a stage. I was hosting.
Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, I was like, I don't remember that. And then someone was like, oh, this guy named Ed Driscoll is so funny. I was like, oh, that was nice. Someone was like, I don't remember. But then when he talked about it, I remembered what happened. But he said, I'm trying to remember, was it at Stitches, I think, in Boston? It was a club in Boston. But it was the open mics, and I was hosting or whatever. And, that was one of the things, and I don't know if it's still that way, and maybe some, but some of the open mics, in Boston or whatever, you get a little mix of like Lenny Clark would come by, and it's like, well, he's obviously not an open micer, but you know, you have good people, and you have a good person who hosts, and you try to keep this show. But I didn't realize it was his first time, but I did remember, and he told the story about everybody was supposed to do like 10 minutes or whatever, or no more than 7 to 10 or whatever. That was the thing. And Louis got up there and like did about 45 seconds and was eating it, and he panicked and he bailed. And I had to come running from the back. I'm like back in the pond, like, what? They're like, he's up. They were like running through the room. And I forgot I'd said this, but until Louis told us that, but apparently I got up there and I was like, folks, that's why we have the light. For a guy to go on and on like that, now the show has no more time left, because he'd only been on like that. I lectured him about like he's bumped all these comics and stuff. So I didn't know that was his first time, and I barely remembered it till I saw him tell this story. And I was like, holy shit, man, that's pretty funny. And I do remember you bailing, because I can still see me running from the back of the club. It was seriously less than a minute.
Yeah, right now, if you are in the heart of Boston, there is a chance that you get some like the Steve Bjork or Casey Crawford, a couple of the guys that are just locally going to do great shows. They'll pop into those open mics there, but those will have like 30 comedians trying to get on them, and you'll get 3 minutes and all that. Like Laugh Boston does an open mic and all that stuff. And then as you get like Lowell, Massachusetts, Manchester, New Hampshire, into those, the open mics there, you're probably never going to see those guys, at least a lot of the time, go to them. It'd be a lot more rare. It's mostly going to be, if you get a crowd, that's nice, but it's going to be the same comedians all the time. Those you generally are going to get 5 to 7 to 10 minutes in those, so you get longer time. So that's really it's a really saturated open mic scene, which is awesome, obviously, to have so many options to go to. Yeah, but there are hits and misses, and I hear the old times of when, like Steve Sweeney would just be all around. Like you would be, if you went to an open mic, you're going to run into him. He's going to be there. Or like Conan could come in, or whoever the heck,
There were always some good pros, and we used to do it, like in the Boston, especially when I was there. It's fun. You work on stuff. That's when I would work on stuff. Start out with something funny. Here's the thing I'm testing. And it was okay. And here's my funny bye. And you do that. But it was fun. It's the camaraderie of the people. But like you say, it's fun. I remember one of my favorites, Catch a Rising Star, which is in Cambridge. And I think Rick Jenkins is trying to open a club like right across the way there in Boston from where the old Catch a Rising Star, which was prior to that was Jonathan Swift's. I don't know what kind of store it is now, but it's right there in Harvard Square. But that was my favorite. I think that's still my favorite club of all time. The audience was just so good there. And we used to have the smartest, and Louis Black was in there all the time, and just like really good smart acts. And boy, it was so fun working there. But they had an open mic on Sunday, and you get a little of everything. I remember it was really funny one time I see on the sign-up sheet, and this guy wrote his name, and he's like, not an open micer. And I still laugh about that to this day, going like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, okay, well, thank you for deigning to come down here, and who are you, and why does any of us care? And of course he was like, it's like nobody had heard of before or since. I was like, well, then what are you? And like the fact that he like wrote that down just made us laugh so hard.
No, we itch for those people because like a lot of the time, like let's say we're on a showcase and there's 5 comedians. We're all right now and usually maybe they're doing it for 2 or 3 years of comedy or any of that kind of stuff, but we're hitting the crowd, we're creating the energy in a similar way, and that's fine and all that. But there are some times where a real pro comes in and you're like, oh, that's how you do it. In another universe that I don't even understand how good they are. And it's really good to see that from time to time. Like, it was actually Steve Bjork who was the first person to ever do that to me, where we were at a show where everybody, it was a bunch of, it was an older skewed crowd, not a lot of them scattered. And the first 5 comics did 8 shit. And then Steve went up. Yeah, it's a tough room. But I watched him go, like before he went up, he analyzed that and then went up and brought the energy into the room. And then I went after him and I did great because he did that. And to this day, it's still like that's a skill I don't even understand how you get to that level, and it's exciting, because
and I guess it's experience. Your instincts kick back in. Even out, like I hadn't done, because I must say I'm working on this one-man show now that is fun because it's all these weird stories I have from Hollywood, and it's really fun. So it's not really stand-up per se, although, it's funny and funny little stories all the way through. And I forgot my point. And that's what I do in the show. So, like, I think the guy would maybe like write some of this crap down. But no, and then I've been kind of lucky as I've played theaters, and I haven't played a lot of clubs. I'm not into stand-up comedy clubs too much, and so I've been able to pick and choose a little bit and do Vegas and this and that. And then I did a thing out here which I hadn't done like a show for a while, and it was a little boozier than I'd been used to, a little chattier or whatever. And so at first I was like, oh, this is weird. But it was like, boy, I was like, bang, 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 and all those things came back, going like, oh, all those instincts of how to handle a crowd like that. It's like, oh, yeah, I guess you've learned it, and it stays there. It's like, and it's still not my favorite thing to do. I hate when I got to really pound away here now, because if I stop for more than 30 seconds, they're gonna chat, or they're gonna, and all that's running through your head. And it's funny, like, I wasn't even enjoying the show, but I got afterwards, people were like, it's really great, and it's like, and it was good because they were entertained, and that was my job that night. You know what I mean? But I remember thinking, like, I hate doing that, but it's useful to know how to do that. And I had that thought, like you guys are talking about, going like, boy, in my first year or two, I would have gotten eaten alive there. That would have been the end of it. So, the good part is it sticks with you. It is a little like the riding a bike thing. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, there's some kind of like slowing down the game, like football, where they talk about like when a college player goes in the NFL.
Absolutely.
And it's just so fast in the beginning, like where people talk like, what? Like, what are you saying? But later.
That is a great analogy, and yeah, it's really, really like that. It's like even like doing TV or getting on the first, what the hell? And then you get a little more answers like, oh, okay, I've done this before, and not too cool for school, but you get a little more relaxed, and you're not thinking so much. It's the instincts, right? Like the football players will say and stuff too. It's like, I go out there, that's the defense. It's not like, okay, if I see this, I have to, you don't have to think too much. It just starts coming. And I don't think there's any other, there's no, magic bullet other than experience, right? I think that's what it is.
No, yeah, there's a lot of classes that teach comedy out here, and they are awesome, for what it is. Like you said in the beginning, to learn a little bit of the rules. But there are some people that you like. Could you teach Sam Kinison how to do comedy, or is that just something where you're like, how do you teach that?
Yeah, it's like, and that's why I was like to me more when and I've taught I've taught like some online like writing kind of stuff, and the same kind of thing. I stress it, like, you can use this for a lot of different things. You want to you want to make the jury laugh a little bit. Here's how people in these other lines of work. But I mean, it gets people's attention. And I also do consulting for like corporate guys that are kind of struggle speaking or whatever, and it's like. And that's another thing too. Is like, I don't have them up there working like, hey, nice shirt. What did you blow down hoe? I think I have of Microsoft doing that. But if you're funny and work in their parameters that feels natural with them, that keeps people's attention, right? Because otherwise the attention span just goes. And so that's why I always try to emphasize some people. I know this is a thing talking about open mic and stand-up comedy, but I would encourage people to, you don't know what direction it's going to take you in. I didn't really know either. I'm like, I guess I'm funny. I'm going to do this. Can I do this? And then it just, your little world rolls along, and you start learning all these little skills.
Yeah, don't say no. That was like you said, that's a huge takeaway. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago, where right now, if someone asked us to do a certain amount of time, what would we say yes to? And it's basically how much would we lie? So, like right now, if you were like, what are you good at? We should probably only be doing 10 minutes. But I was like, if someone asked me to do an hour, I would totally say yes and try to figure it out.
I mean, depending. Like if they're saying, okay, it's going to be on network TV, you might be like, all right, maybe not. But I hear you, like, depending on the circumstance, right, of going like, oh, up at the bar there, I surely don't want those three drunk guys at the end to think less of me. And it's like, yeah, no, if you can, I'm with you. A little white lie like that, and because it's the only way you're going to grow. And like you say, you don't want to. It's when people go in and misrepresent themselves terribly. That happens too. And then it ruins the rest. I'm a professional comic. And then you bomb and they're like, we're never doing comedy in this place again. That shit happens, and that's dangerous. And it's like, it's true. So it's like you said, I mean, I know you're being funny and I know you're saying I'd do the hour, but I'm sure you'd be like, depending on the circumstance, you're not going to go up, and it ruins it for you again. So I'll never be back at this club. I told them I a freaking half hour, and I only had 10, and they're never going to believe me again. So
yeah, you do have to stretch those comedy muscles a little bit. So if you feel comfortable at 10 and they go, hey, can you do 15? Okay, sure. Right. But it's like you're not going to go from not going to the gym to lifting, or
Right.
lifting 265 or whatever.
I'm
Oh,
saying
I'll blow out my spine trying to fucking do it. I promise you that.
So yeah, I'm with you.
So I have a
Yeah,
question for you.
You go in.
Did you have something more in that vein,
No.
Anthony?
No, I would have been down another tangent. Go ahead.
So one of the big things that I love about getting on stage and writing the jokes, getting on stage and saying it is that like endorphin rush you get when a joke just lands and everybody's laughing and you can feel the vibrations of the laughs. And so you having written for sitcoms and helping out with other comedians and stuff, do you get that same endorphin rush? Like let's say like Drew Carey
I
says
don't know.
online.
I don't know if it's the endorphin rush, but I get a good amount of satisfaction. Like I enjoy it too, and like I guess I say, yeah, there's nothing like that feeling of you doing it and you feeling it. But yeah, it feels good to watch somebody in some big thing or see your jokes quoted someplace and stuff. Like I've always thought that's pretty cool. Makes me feel good. And I mean, I like writing books too, and I hear from people, I was laughing out loud, and like I didn't hear them doing that, but it's nice to get that feedback and go like, that's cool. They're doing it. So a little of everything. Like you say, I guess nothing beats that particular rush, but I do enjoy the other stuff too. And I guess the more I do it and stuff, I don't have to have it all the time. I guess I shouldn't look down on anybody that does, but like, it's funny. I was thinking like Jay Leno, he's doing the Tonight Show every night. Like you'd think that would get your comedy fix, right? And he was doing like bowling alleys, places and stuff. He would work every freaking weekend. It's like, I don't need it or love it that much. That's just me. And I have some other friends like that too, really great comics. It's like, good Lord, they'll drive an hour to do a 10-minute. I'm like, you have money. I don't love it that much, I guess. It's just kind of funny. I mean, it's a good feeling, but I guess, I don't know. Everybody's different. And, yeah.
It's got to be close. The best feeling I think I ever get in comedy is giving another comic a tag and then seeing them do it and it works and you're like, yes.
Yeah, it's fun, right? Yeah, especially if you help a friend or go like, oh, say this. It's like, hey, that felt good too. No, it's good to enjoy some of that other stuff too. It's not just about you.
So when you were writing on sitcom stuff, were you still going out and doing stand up, or were you like 100% focused on?
Well, I was, but it depended. You know what I mean? Because if we got really busy, I'd be like, no. Or if you get like a TV shot, or I'd go out. I wasn't looking to do it. But then in sitcoms you go on hiatus, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, now I'm going to go do more stand up or whatever. And then I've been through a few writers' strikes. So like in 2008, when we went through that strike. I was working in Vegas constantly because we couldn't write for 5 months. So it varies, but I definitely did not have as much hunger because, there's a lot of late hours too in doing sitcom and stuff. And, I had a fiance at the time and then I had a wife and a kid. And it's like, I'm happy to hang out over the weekend and not do a show. Fun to do when you can, or something good comes up, or they're like, hey, we're doing this benefit here and it's friends of yours and stuff. Like, oh, that'll be cool, let's do that. But I know people, they were leaving the freaking writing room like 10 o'clock, couldn't wait to hop down the improv and do another 10. I'm like, not me.
I love this because we like the different perspectives of how to make it far into comedy are so important because we had Dobie on, like you said, Dobie really well. And Dobie has his perspective on comedy is very great because he's when he talks, he's like, guys, don't worry about you're probably never going to get to the level because the level that you need to get to the highest level, these guys are every night, always out, all this stuff. And he was such a the Dobie was always big on hammering the streets and all that. And I know that you can go out and write for a sitcom like you were doing on the side, and it's a tangential version in the same direction. So we just love the different versions of the same
yeah,
funny bone,
I'd rather I did plenty of road work and everything else, but it's like and not putting it down or made a living in this and that, but it's like that is not my artistic fulfillment doing that. It's like I know I'm funny, I can do this, let's do that or whatever. And it's kind of, I don't know, as I'm getting older and stuff too, I like the idea of the books being around and things being around that people can hopefully read for a long time and enjoy and, instead of, I mean, Dobie has it, and he's right, as I know Dobie too, and we always have these discussions, and he really doesn't like the people. None of us do. They'll be like, I know what I'm great, I'm already, and it's like, you got to earn stuff. But like you're saying, there's different ways to earn things too, but I guess it's A, depends on what you want to do, and B, what you can do. If I had tried to write a sitcom and it sucked, I'd go, okay, I guess I'm doing stand-up in some variety or whatever. I was just fortunate that I was able to, spread in a lot of different directions, but I find all of it pretty satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's like all part of the funny bone. So
Yes.
as we get closer to wrapping up here, we got a little bit of time left. I know Wayne's got a question he always asks at the end that he likes, but one more I had was, right now when we're doing open mics, all of us as comedians, we really have no idea how to ascend to whatever the next level we consider to be. And I know we've talked about a lot of avenues to go, but do you have advice to somebody like in our position who's like, all we're doing is going anywhere that'll let us talk and let us talk? What takes us from that to being able to, open for Steve Sweeney or any of these guys and all that? Is it networking more than anything else? Is it hitting the pavement? Like, what would you give for advice?
There's a little of everything, isn't it? Like, because like I said, I didn't have it planned. Like, oh, here's what's going to happen. Dennis
Sure.
is going to think I'm funny, and when I get to Boston, he's going to be getting the show.
Yeah.
There's really no way to know. I guess the biggest advice is like, be the best you can be. Work on your stuff. Work on your talent. Put the work in, and stuff will happen that you're not even thinking about. And it's good to network. Or if you see Steve Sweeney, go up and go like, hey, this is my name. Nice to meet you. And I'm a guy, and even say like, hey, I'd love to open for you sometime or something. Or it's okay, you do that, and some will say yes, some will say no. But just keeping yourself out there and and presenting yourself as a serious pro about it too, right? Not some goofball going like, my buddies think I'm fucking hilarious. Not that, but and just put yourself in the position. But boy, there's no substitute for working on your stuff. I mean, it's so funny. I still get, obviously, and you probably get some people too, but I have people like, Ed, how do you get on that show? I'm funny. Can I get, and it's like, okay, well, you got to write it and write a spec and like, oh, you see their eyes glaze over when they realize, oh, I have to actually do some work. It's like, well, yeah, and it's fun work, but it's work. It's just like my nephew said, oh, this friend of his, like, oh, he wants to be a comedy writer. And he said, like, hey, can he call you? And I'm like, of course, or whatever. So this kid calls me and he's like, I love sports stuff. And because I do I've done like 11 ESPYs, awards. I'm a big sports fan. So I run for all these sports things. And he's like, oh, I do that. And he's like, yeah, so how do you get in? And I was like, well, you want to put material together, portfolio. I said, you want to write sketches, and he was like, well, I'm an ideas guy mostly. Seriously. And that told me, it's like, oh my God, dudes. I don't blame him, but it was very clear to me. It's like, well, this guy doesn't want to work. He was like, I've got an idea. Everybody's got a freaking idea. Can you execute? Do you put it on paper? Let's see it.
It's like the person that says, I could be a comedian. I'm situationally funny around my friends. I just don't know if I can write it down or something. You're like, yeah, you don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, and you might be able to, but you got to try. And that's it. And I'd say, too, if you want to write stuff down. Write short stories. Write the stuff. I mean, because you're going to need samples at some point. And that's where people are like, oh, you knew Dennis Miller. It's like, I had to sit down and write 100 freaking topical jokes and get it approved by HBO. So it's like, I had to put the work in. But I had been writing for me and writing and keeping myself creative so that when the opportunity was there, I was able to grab it. So you don't know where any of this is gonna take you, but the best thing you can do for yourself is take it seriously, do the work, do improve yourself, write stuff down, write a spec. You can write a sitcom spec. There's people that want to get in a sitcom. I'm like, you got to write a spec. I was an award-winning writer and I had to write a spec to get into this. Like, so it's tough, and they want to see your work. They don't give a damn about if your cousin thinks you're funny. Cousin is Spielberg or something. So I think it's putting in that work and presenting yourself, and just that's really all you can do too, because you can frustrate. Like I've been really fortunate, and I could have been more fortunate too. You look at things like like I had a shot at this, and that didn't get picked up. Boy, if that show had gotten, you're gonna bounce all over with that. And I always try to, I just try to stay in the piece of it. And I sound like I'm always like this at the time. You react and stuff, but my manager was always saying it's about the process. It's about, and it's. You hate to hear it, but it's freaking true. You just got to do what you do and hope it finds and lands someplace. And I think if you do the hard work and earnestly and are polite and nice with the people you interact with, opportunities will spring up that you don't even expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
Really long answer. Sorry.
No, love it.
There's a lot of people that in my life that have found out that I've been doing that. I didn't really. Aside from the podcast, really, I didn't really go out and tell everybody in my daily work life and all that. And some have found out and they say, "Oh, man, how do you do that?" And I think I could do that. And then I show them I have a notepad on my phone where I write down all my ideas, and it's at this point 45 pages long, whatever. I'm just flipping through, and they're just like, I don't know if I. It's just like you said, I don't know if I want to do that. It's like, but
Yeah,
you got to write
it's
down,
work.
like you said, you got to write.
It's great work, but it's work. You know, and that is the thing. And I guess that's the thing that separates everybody, right? There's like idea guys. It's just I can't tell you here, and shows too. I got a show idea. Okay, when you got like I can't tell you how many times we've heard it's a modern day version of All in the Family. I've seen that pitch from like 25 different people. I'm like, okay, you got anything else? Is it? Because like even when I'm selling a pilot, I wrote the spec script. Here's a breakdown of perhaps future episodes. Here's an outline of each character. It's like this stuff has to be thought out for the most part. It can't just be like, you do this and that. That's great. Like they're not interested, you know. And that's the same thing. It's like, well, that's a bunch of work. And it is. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass going like, well, can't they see this? You know, it's like, no, they can't. No. So you really have to lead. Some executives are better than others at saying it. I remember the late, great Kevin Rooney would always talk about. He's like, you know, some of these executives read your script, but in their head, they're like, John walks in and says, hello, what are you doing? Norm, what are you doing? It's true. Like, they don't get it. You know, and there's an apocryphal tale that they always tell in California, and that has probably got some truth in it, but about this writing team wrote a script, and the network guy was like, this is awful. And they were like, hey, well, let us come in and talk to you about it. And they came in and read the script, and he's laughing and laughing, and the network guy said, oh, well, if you're going to do it like that. It's like sometimes they don't see it, you know?
Makes sense. All right, Wayne, you got your special question?
Yeah, I have two quick questions for you.
It's making me nervous now. This is some weird shit.
No.
Yeah, he always asks a question at the end that I'm like, this is useless. But every time he has to do it, and people like it. So maybe it's good.
So I do have an additional question that's not the useless one. Just out of curiosity, if there is there a show, whether it be sitcom or variety show or something, past or present, something that maybe before your time or going on now that you wish you could have written on? Do you have like a, man, I really wish I would have loved to write on the Brady Bunch or something like that?
I'm sure there's a million, right? Or like, boy, back from the old, I mean, when I was just a kid, but like the old Bob Newhart show or, you know, some of those are like Mary Tyler Moore, right? Like some of those, God, MASH. Yeah, there's plenty I wouldn't have minded writing on, but I think it was like 15 at the time, so they probably wouldn't have let me. But yeah, you know, there's some great ones out there, that's for sure. Although I will say, I finally got to work with Bob Newhart. And again, I have a guy who's older than me. Like, cause there's not that many around. Like, I go, you're funny, son. Like, you're damn right, sir. It's so great because I always was a big fan of his. And then my manager ran into his manager in Vegas. And this was unbeknownst to me. This is like 5-6 years ago. And they were talking, and Bob's manager said, oh, Bob is doing a roast for Don Rickles, and he's looking for some help with some material. And then my manager, being a good manager, said, oh, you should check out my guy's stuff here. Send it over to Bob. It's really good. And my manager didn't tell me because he said he didn't want to tell me if they turned me down or whatever, because he knows how sensitive I am. But luckily, he sent it over to Newhart, who liked it. So my manager calls me. He's like, hey, I sent your stuff to Bob Newhart. He loved it. He wants to work with you. Can he call you? I'm like, yeah, I guess he can call me. It depends. I might be busy. Yes, it's Bob freaking Newhart, you know. And he called, and oh my God, it was so great. You know, it's funny. I don't get starstruck too much or whatever. I really don't. But I was like, this is Bob freaking Newhart. So he calls up, and he's like, oh, you know, can you come over to my place there? Just maybe print out some stuff and bring it over to the old school. I was like, yes, sir. You know, I can do that. And then so I get a little lost, like going over to his place, and I'm trying to find it kind of in the woods there, and like, cause it's up in the mountains. I'm like, oh, that's got to be the address. And like, I'm turning around, and I wipe out all his trash cans that were out like in the street. Like loudest noise you've ever heard. I just like pull up, like neighbors are looking out the window. It's like, is it, you know, it's like a helicopter dropping chandeliers. What the hell? Loudest thing you've ever heard. They were empty, luckily, but I'm like, holy shit, you know. And I put them up, and I go up the door, and then he answers the door, and I just couldn't resist. And I'm like, oh, they said, hi, Mr. Newhart. And he said, oh, Bob. I said, Bob, I got to tell you, I knocked over all your trash cans when I was pulling up. And he goes, oh, did you pick them up? I said, well, yeah, of course. He said, come on in. Bob Newhart. That's just what it's like. It was so much fun. And talking about the that's funny thing. So he sits down and I give him this list, and I'm like, oh, he's just this delightful guy. And he starts to read my stuff, and then he looks up and he goes, oh, Ed, you won't be offended if I'm not laughing out loud as I'm reading this? And I said, I'll be surprised, but not offended, no. And we talked about this, it's funny thing, right? And once in a while I'd be like, oh, that's funny, and we kind of did it, and that was really fun. How did we get to Bob Newhart? Oh, because talking about shows, because I always loved both of his sitcoms and stuff, and so that was really thrilling to be able to do that. I was a guy I didn't think I was going to be able to, he showed me that, he won the first, he didn't say this, but I happen to know this, the first comedy Grammy ever in 1959.
Oh, really?
Which is before I was born. And I saw it, and I said, well, I know the button-down mind of Bob Newhart. So I said, I happen to know that. So he's like, I can show it to you. And I said, yeah. I said, I'd have that up right here. He's like, oh, Jenny thinks it's ostentatious. His wife. So we had to like go in his den and show me where he had the little Grammy, It's so funny. So, and as I'm leaving too, like it's funny. I go, hey, thanks. This is such an honor. And he goes, oh, hey Ed, and you better watch out. Anyway, some feral garbage cans that are throwing themselves in front of cars around. Careful as you leave.
That must have been an incredible experience.
Yeah, it was awesome. Oh, and he's so sweet. And he called up and he's like, yeah, Ed, I wasn't able to go because I was working on another show in L.A. And the thing was in New York, and he roasted Rickles. And he called me, and he's like, oh, Ed, it's, stuff went really good, and they quoted a bunch of your stuff in GQ, so pick up a copy of that, and it was like so sweet of him, And, when I was at this place too, like, I just sat there and he's telling me Don Rickles stories. I'm like, can you imagine? And I'm sitting there like, I didn't want to leave. And it was like, he's telling me these stories, and then finally it was funny, he's like, so Ed, we sat here. It was like his nice way of saying you can go now,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, freaking move in. This is unbelievable.
Yep.
So to get a glimpse of like this classic comedy, like, that, like I say, it was nice to feel like I'm a youngster compared to these guys, but I always had a real respect and do for for the past history of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's like that as well, and there's a lot to be said for that too, because you look back and see how people did stuff and that. And, some people aren't interested in it. They're like,
So that might have answered what Anthony calls stupid question. So I'm trying to.
I have a lot of stupid answers, so I can help.
Well, here we go. Match made in heaven. So I've been trying to expand on my what I take in for comedy. I'm trying to get out of my my wheelhouse of what I normally listen to for stand up. So I've been asking guests if they had anything that was kind of not obscure, but just what they would recommend that I could check out for a stand up special or something that might not be something that I've listened to.
Well, this is an interesting thing, and I will tell you this. When I first started out, I watched a lot of different comics, but it's like, I don't watch anybody anymore, and I haven't in quite some time. And the reason, George Carlin wrote about this in his last book, which I think was published posthumously, but he had written, I think, Final Words, or I have it somewhere. But he was saying, I don't watch other comics. He's like, because I always want to come at something with my own thoughts and not feel like I'm being influenced. And he said, also, I don't want to steal accidentally. And like, I knew exactly what he said. Like, again, it's really important, I think, originally watching a bunch of guys, but I don't watch anymore for those very same reasons. Like, even when I was writing on Dennis Miller Live, we would all write on some topic, and we would then read each other's stuff as we were turning in. It's like, I never wanted to see anything. And same with like, even a news story now pops on Twitter. If I'm on, it's like, I don't look at any of my friends' Twitter because I want it coming right from my angle. I don't want to be influenced. Then I'll check out my friends and go, oh, that's a funny angle. I didn't do that. But I don't want to be influenced. And I also don't want to accidentally steal. Like, you sit there and go like, well, that was my thought, right? Or you have that little doubt here and there. So it's a weird way of answering. Like I said, so I got no recommendations for you now. It's so funny. I don't watch many stand-up specials. I watch little chunks of Norm Macdonald or somebody pops on, or a friend of mine, but I don't watch it for those very reasons that Carlin talked about. I was like, oh, okay, yay, somebody else is saying it. I thought I was just goofy or something, which I am, but not for that reason. So I don't got nobody for you.
Yeah, that's a fair answer.
Shit, Wayne. There we go. This is exactly what I was looking for. This happened last week too, and I love it.
You watch Anthony will watch you, and that's really all you need to do.
Yeah, well,
That's all we're gonna
what I said last week too, I've been watching it more, and Anthony kind of turned me on to doing this, but I watch now more in terms of the technical aspect of how people are holding their mic, how they move, how they intonate certain things, not so much the material, but just stage presence and things like that.
Interesting. You know, Dobie's huge on that. I never did any of that. It just kind of came to me. I don't like to think too much about stuff. But it's good if you can do it. I probably should have.
I don't follow any of it. I just watch it. I do my own thing, but I do like to see
you, man.
I do like to see how people handle themselves up there.
Well, good. Well, we're at the end here. So, Ed, where can the people find you?
I don't know, because I got my little sites and my web things. Do you guys put it up on your show? And not that I don't watch every episode, you know I do. But
No,
Yeah, I'll put it in there for you.
But I will let you guys know. Like I say, like I'm hoping to bring my one-man show, Cracking Up, which is about my 25 years in Hollywood of stories about Bob Newhart and that sort of thing. Hoping to bring that up New England way this fall. So definitely let you guys know about that.
Definitely, I'd love to check that out if you do.
I have a website that's got speaking stuff on a website that has my writing stuff and links to my books and all that kind of stuff. So it's all like it's all the world of Ed Driscoll. It's probably too scattered around right now, which I'll get somebody to kind of hone it in. But I have a bunch of different things hanging out there. But nothing to promote specifically, other than yes, buy my books. I don't know if you guys will put that up on the thing. I'll put the links to.
Yeah.
Yeah, send me the links to it all. I'll put them up.
People like them because Spilled Gravy is all about kind of my comedy career, starting from where and how I went through. So that whole thing is about me and also relationships and about me being in recovery. I've been sober for 30 years. And so it's all intertwined and all that. And people really seem to like it. And then I wrote another book called Laugh Damn It, which is that's just a bunch of jokes. It's like 500 jokes. And that's fun if you just want to read jokes. And then my latest one was one called Unmoved Chess Pieces, which, again, just like Spilled Gravy, makes no sense until you read it. But it's a funny look at grief. It was about me taking care of my parents when they passed away. So it's plenty, it's always a yuck fest with me. But all the books have different audiences, but people seem to enjoy it. This thing is the best when you can, make people laugh and make them think. Too, for me, feel. And so, sounds corny, but it really is like the best feedback. It's nice that I still will get emails from people I don't know. And Spilled Gravy's been out since 2006. And people say like, well, you know what? I didn't overcome alcoholism, but I have this insecurity, or I love when you talk about this or that. And I was like, oh, wow. It's kind of neat to relate to people, and that people like, it's like, hey, I'm actually doing some good in this world besides just making people laugh, which there's nothing wrong with. But that's why I've been finding my books very satisfying. Hey,
like
so my teenager banging around in there. I'm just wrapping up.
Well, buy the books and just know that we're really pumped that you came on, and we really appreciate it. And join us next week where we discuss why Barry Manilow is gay and why Barry White is straight and how we meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And
Well, I don't know if you want to do that either, but whatever you want. It's not mine to judge. Thank you, guys. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. You're the man.
I don't think he means underage. I think he just
No,
means
not
younger than him.
No offense, but I don't think he means girls.